We'll see some of the options, best fits, best options at number 14 as the president of DraftCountdown.com, Scott Wright, joins us with a look at the Eagles at 14 and the NFL Draft, which will be in Philadelphia, April the 27th. You can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN. Welcome back, Scott. What's happening, pal?
Hey, not much. Thanks for having me. Just getting excited here. We're in the stretch run leading up to the draft, and it's going to be that silly time of the season now. We're going to start hearing lots of rumors and misdirections and smoke screens. So it's a fun time of the year.
Sure is. And, last year the Eagles moved their way up to number 2. They navigated from 13 to 8 to 2, which really made for an interesting time. They are right now nestled at number 14, kind of right in the middle of that draft. They didn't have a pick. They made that trade, so they're lucky to even have something here. But at number 14, let's throw a couple of ideas and options your way. I've been hearing a lot more Christian McCaffrey recently, as he seemingly has gone from an early second-round pick, a late first-round pick. Some now seemingly have him jumping over 14 into the top 10. How about Christian McCaffrey? Where's he on your board?
Yeah, there's been some speculation that McCaffrey could be in play as high as number 8 overall to the Carolina Panthers. To me, that would be a little rich. And even 14, I don't know that I would use a first-round pick on McCaffrey. And I'm a little biased because I wouldn't use a first-round pick on any running back, even Fournette, who I view as an elite prospect. So just philosophically, I'm against it. But specifically with a player like McCaffrey, it just usually doesn't work out well. And there's no question he's talented. He's a terrific all-around weapon as a runner, a pass catcher, as a return man. But it seems like whenever I see these types of talented prospects that teams say, well, we're gonna get creative with them, we're gonna find ways to get him the ball, they rarely, if ever, do. You look at Reggie Bush, had some flashes, but never really became what he was truly capable of. You look at Tavon Austin, there's just so many examples of teams not doing what's necessary to maximize a player like that. Ted Ginn was another top 10 pick who they didn't really get the most out of in Miami. So that's what scares me with Christian McCaffrey. And of all years to wait on a running back, this is going to be a great one because 20% of the underclassmen that came out were running backs. So there's going to be value at second, third, fourth round. And specifically, if you want a player like McCaffrey, I think that's the type of player you can draft well beyond the first round. So I wouldn't be a huge fan of that for the Eagles personally, but that's definitely the range. He's going to go somewhere as high as 8, and I don't think he escapes the top 20.
Okay, if Fournette is regarded as the number 1 guy, what do you have at 2, 3, and 4 at that position?
Yeah, Fournette is far and away number 1. He's just a truly special prospect, one of only 2 players I gave my elite grade to in this entire draft. And then I have Dalvin Cook number 2 and Christian McCaffrey 3. And then number 4 is Joe Mixon, the running back from Oklahoma, who's really the wild card. If not for the off-the-field concerns, I think he'd probably be number 2 on this list, and he'd be going in the top 12 to 15 overall picks. But it's just a matter of how far those off-the-field issues are going to drop him down the boards. But it's a really talented and deep crop of runners. And of all these guys we've talked about so far, some players I like even later on. Deontay Foreman from Texas, if you're looking for a big power runner. Wayne Gallman from Clemson. Samaje Perine from Oklahoma is a personal favorite. Just incredible depth. You're going to be able to get a really good running back well into day 3.
Scott Wright with us, Draft Countdown. And, Scott, you've got the Eagles taking Alabama corner Marlon Humphrey at 14 in your most recent mock draft. Where do you rate him in this deep cornerback class?
Yeah, and now that Philly has shored up the wide receiver position, which was their biggest need coming into the offseason, I think corner kind of stands out as an area they really need to address. And corner is another position, one of the deepest areas in this entire draft, where if Philly wants to wait until the second, third, even fourth round, they can probably get a starting caliber cover guy. But where they are, they have a chance to get one from the top tier. And I am taking Marlon Humphrey from Alabama, who I'm probably a little higher on than most. I think most agree he's either in the back end of the top tier or at the very top of the second tier. But I actually give him a slight edge to the 2 kids from Ohio State, Darian Conley and Marshawn Lattimore. Of course, Sidney Jones from Washington dropped out of the equation after suffering a a major injury during a pre-draft workout. Trey Davis-White from LSU, I think, is going to be a first-round option. But Humphrey, I think, has a chance to be the best of all of them. He's got the biggest frame. His father, Bobby Humphrey, used to play for the Broncos, for those who go back a little ways and remember him. Just a dynamic, explosive athlete. He also was a track star in high school. Can really run. And the big knock on Marlon Humphrey, the thing that skeptics are going to ding him for is that, well, he's not much of a playmaker in coverage. He lacks the ball skills and the instincts. But even so, in his 2 years as starter, because he came out as a redshirt sophomore, so his best football is still ahead of him, still racked up 13 pass breakups and 5 interceptions in those 2 years. So it's not like he was a complete weakness in that area. So I really like Marlon Humphrey. He's my top-rated cornerback, but as I said, he's in that 1, 2, 3, 4 range for probably just about anybody.
The fact that you referenced, for those of you who remember Bobby Humphrey, I mean, now I really feel like, whoa, I remember the flat top like it was yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe he was a first-round pick back in the day, and going back, I hate to say it, that's like 30 years now.
Oh, my
practically.
gosh.
We're old.
25?
30's enough. Scott Wright with us. Hey, Marlon Humphrey, though, he does have a history of hamstring issues. Why should the Eagles choose him instead of someone else there, like King or Tabor or maybe somebody else?
Well, and you look at some of the other top corners in this draft. Marshawn Lattimore has a history of injury history that's concerning as well. So definitely both those guys that's concerned. If you're looking just for the safest corner of this draft, it's probably Gary and Conley from Ohio State. Might not have the same upside as guys like Lattimore and Humphrey, but just a really solid player. And just to put in perspective, 2 years ago, Ohio State had a secondary that had Eli Apple, who was a 10th overall pick. Von Bell was a starting safety. He was a second-round pick. Tyvis Powell, he's currently in the NFL. And the fourth starter was Gary and Conley. It wasn't Marshawn Lattimore, who's probably going to be a top 10 overall pick. It wasn't Malik Hooker, the safety, who's probably going to be a top 10 overall pick. It was Conley getting that playing time. So I think that really speaks volumes about the type of player he is. And he's going to go earlier than people expect. In my last mock draft, I believe I had him going number 11 overall to the New Orleans Saints. And I think he's going to go in the top half of round 1.
Now, Scott, Mike's going on the radio here before and said he would be okay if the Eagles went corner. Are you in lockstep with that they have such a need at that position that they should just load up on the corner position?
Quick asterisk, I said in the second, third, and fourth round. I don't know if I would go 1, 2, and 3, but I would go 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you can make a really strong case. I don't know about all of them, but certainly 2 of the first 3, 2 of the first 4 picks, I think you could make a really good argument. And in the NFL draft world, that process is called flooding. And we saw the Panthers do that last year at the cornerback position. They went out and they drafted Darryl Worley, and they drafted James Bradford, and they drafted Zach Sanchez, all within a span of 1 or 2 rounds. So I think the Eagles are a perfect candidate to do that because that need in the secondary there at corner just really sticks out like a sore thumb when you really analyze their depth chart.
Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com. What about some second-round guys? I like the kid King from Washington. I think he would be a guy that would be really interesting there. But as you were on the last time and said, you could probably get starting corners, second, third, fourth round guys. Who are some of the guys in that second round that Eagle fans should keep an eye on?
Yeah, and you mentioned Kevin King from Washington, who there's talk maybe he even sneaks into the back end of the first round, and he tested extremely well. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. He ran a legit 4.4. He's one of those players that, for me, he would get drafted earlier than I'd be willing to take him. I have more of a third-round grade on him. He's probably going to go a round or 2 earlier than that. And my concern with him is he's almost too tall. I think that length is a disadvantage at times for him when he's transitioning. And I almost felt he played more like and moved more like a free safety at times. The problem is he doesn't have the bulk or the physicality to be a safety. So a little bit of a tweener, but King's very much a workout warrior type. Some guys that I'd be looking out for, Sidney Jones from Washington, who I mentioned. Now, you're going to have to wait on him. It's 6-month recovery time, so he might not be available right at the start of the season, but you're getting a legitimate top 15 to top 20 overall talent, maybe somewhere in the second or third round if you have a little foresight and patience. So I think he's somebody you got to keep an eye on. Chidobe Awuzie from Colorado's got a lot of buzz right now. He could sneak into the back end of the first round as well. Another kind of safety cornerback tweener. He could play either. And my favorite comparison for him is Antoine Winfield, who was one of my personal favorite players when he was in the league. Really a physical, instinctive defensive back. Cordrea Tankersley from Clemson, a lot of big-time experience, a big corner from a program that has a knack for producing players at that position. So I could go on and on. No kidding. I could name 20 names that I think have a chance to go at the cornerback position, that have a chance to go in the top 4 or 5 rounds.
Deep class there, and, of course, Eagles in big-time need. One of the reasons why I said, as you kind of referred to as flooding, I would look down that direction, get as many talented guys at that position as you can now. But what about edge rusher? There's another spot at 14. What's the depth like there? And in that little area around 14, who are some names to keep an eye on?
There's actually pretty good depth when it comes to pass rushers this year, and it's not often we say that, just because even if there are a lot of them, they go quick because everybody's always looking for pass rushers. But I think this is the type of year where you're going to be able to get a pretty good pass rusher into the 3rd, maybe even the early part of the 4th round. So it just really depends what type of player you're looking for. In terms of for the Eagles, I don't think that's going to be in play in the 1st round. I think they've invested quite a bit there. They brought in Chris Long on a couple-year deal. It isn't going to be the long-term solution, but they re-upped Brandon Graham, Vinny Curry. So I don't think it's going to be a first-round option. If they were going to go that direction in the 1st round, I think some guys that could be in play, maybe Derek Barnett from Tennessee, Charles Harris from Missouri, maybe a Takaris McKinley from UCLA. But I think the sweet spot for the Eagles, if you want to bring in a pass rusher, is going to be maybe the 3rd round. And you could get a guy like Trey Hendrickson from Florida Atlantic, or Tano Passano from Villanova, one of the top small school prospects in this draft. One player that I really like that's going to be a day 2 pick is Deshaun Hall from Texas A&M. I think he's kind of a poor man's version of Taco Charlton from Michigan, who's going to go in the 1st round. Value-wise, I think I might rather have Hall in the 2nd or 3rd round than Charlton in the 1st round. Both players, they're kind of just big balls of raw clay that can be molded into whatever you want to make them. They remind me of Chandler Jones when he was coming out of college. If you want to bulk them up, make them a defensive end in either a 4-3 or 3-4 scheme, they can do it. If you want to trim them down and make them a 3-4 outside linebacker, they have the athleticism and the length to do that as well. So keep an eye on Deshaun Hall. I think he's one of the more underrated prospects in this draft, especially on the D-line.
What about Corey Davis from Western Michigan? What's your read on him? I know he's been hurt and hasn't been able to do much, but is he an option at 14?
Not anymore. I think he would have been, along with John Ross from Washington, who's going to be the fastest player in the NFL when he gets drafted. I think they would have been in the mix for Philly before they went out and made some moves there at wideout this offseason. But to me, Mike Williams from Clemson is the cream of the crop at wideout in this class. He's in a top tier all by himself, and I think he's legitimately one of the 10 best players in this draft. And there's some who would make a case for Davis, and there's some who think he's a top 10 overall pick. I think that's a stretch. I compare Davis more to a Josh Doxson from last year. Really good all-around player, and Doxson wound up going, I think, somewhere in the early 20s. So I think that's Davis's range, somewhere in the second half of the 1st round. But John Ross is going to be the interesting one. If we're going to see something crazy on draft day, I wouldn't be shocked to see him maybe go as high as 5 overall, which I think would surprise people. But they really want to bring in a speed receiver. They made a play for Brandon Cooks unsuccessfully, and they have the type of assets where if they really love a guy, they can afford to swing for the fences because they have so many picks from that trade they made last year. So keep an eye on John Ross. I'm concerned about him just because of the durability. He's got a slight frame and multiple injuries to both knees, shoulder, I believe it is. So I'm concerned, but at the end of the day, teams will overlook a lot for a guy who can run 4.2.
We're talking with Scott Wright from DraftCountdown.com. Last year, the Eagles did move up. Howie Roseman, under his watch, the Eagles have moved up frequently. If there was a guy that would be a good fit for them that was worth moving up for, that they couldn't get at 14, is there someone that you think would be a good, say, hey, Howie, that would be the guy to move up for? We've said before on our show, like, hey, if you could get up to get Lattimore, maybe make a move like that. Is there a guy that you think makes sense for them as a fit that would be worth moving up for?
That was just what I was going to say, and not even specifically Lattimore, but if there's one cornerback that they really have a conviction on that they feel is better than the rest, I think they could pursue getting aggressive and going up And we're going to see that run on defensive back start maybe as early as 5 to the Titans, maybe 6 to the New York Jets, then 7 to the Chargers. So there's going to be a run on defensive backs in that 5 to 15 range. So where the Eagles are, they might be toward the latter end of that. They might be at the mercy of the teams picking ahead of them. If they want to kind of call the shots and get their pick of the litter, they might want to try to move up there. But then again, I don't know if you want to expend that draft capital to do that just because there's so much depth in this class. You're still going to get a good cover guy at 14, and even if you didn't go that way in round 1, second round, third round, you're going to be able to get a starting caliber cover guy. So I think if they were going to move up, it would be for a corner that they fall in love with, but I guess I would advise against it.
Yeah, they're in a really interesting spot after free agency because of the receivers that they added here. Still some, murmurs that they could move Jordan Matthews, and I guess if they were to do that, they would need to look for another wide receiver. But, they still do have Nelson Aguilar here. Maybe they still value him much more than the public does. All right, Scott, when we look at the grand scheme of things, Myles Garrett and Solomon Thomas, they seem to be the first two consensus, right? I mean, that's just about everywhere. They're the top two guys. Is you following with that?
Well, yeah, and I think the consensus has now Solomon Thomas going to the 49ers at 2, and that makes a whole lot of sense, but I wouldn't bet anything significant on it. I think it's still very much up in the air. I think the 49ers could go in any number of directions there. It's pretty incredible how far that team has fallen in the last 3-4 years. They went from one of the most talented, deepest teams in the league to I think you can make an argument that they're further behind talent-wise than the Cleveland Browns right now. So this draft, I think the only sure thing is Garrett's going number 1 to the Cleveland Browns. Then after that, we could see some crazy things because I really don't believe there's going to be a huge difference talent-wise between the second pick and maybe the 10th pick or the 8th pick. So it's going to very much come down to the team needs, what they're looking for, the type of player what they value. So it's going to make for a fun draft, I think. I think we might see some wild stuff, but no, the nice thing now though with the draft is now that free agency's played out a little bit, instead of there being 4 or 5 possibilities for every team, we've whittled it down to maybe 2 or 3. So we're narrowing down. I think the teams are as well, but less than 3 weeks out, there's still very few sure things.
Is this the year that we see no quarterbacks taken in the first round?
It's a possibility. In the end, I doubt it because I think when push comes to shove, if they're all available late in round 1, you'll see some of these quarterback-needy teams trade back into the first round, in part to get that extra year on that rookie contract, which when you're talking about a quarterback might be a $25 million year. But the hot spot for quarterbacks in this draft right now is the Cleveland Browns at number 12 because that's the only spot where you say, okay, they're a really likely contender to take a quarterback. You can make an argument for the Texans at 25, but are they going to want to start all over with a rookie? Maybe with the Kansas City Chiefs at 27, but do they really want to replace Alex Smith to the point they'll use a first-round pick? I'm dubious. So if you're a quarterback on the board after number 12 overall, you run the risk of falling out of the first round completely. But if that happens, like I say, you're going to see the 49ers, maybe the Browns, and maybe the Jets make a move back into the first round to get one of these guys. And right now, I think it's going to be a battle between Mitchell Trubisky from North Carolina and Deshaun Watson from Clemson to be that first signal caller off the board.
All right, we're about 3 weeks out. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Check that out for all of your draft stuff, getting ready for the draft. 2 tight ends picked in the first round this year?
Yep, at least. I think O.J. Howard's the best tight end prospect. Really might be the best all-around tight end prospect I've ever seen since I've been doing this. But I go back to Vernon Davis, and I think that was 2005 or 2006, who was an incredible athlete and pass catcher. But I think Howard is that, as well as an outstanding blocker, better size. So Howard's going to go somewhere in the top 10, and he's one of those surprises that could be that I mentioned maybe for the Tennessee Titans as high as number 5, the Jaguars at number 4, the Jets at 6, the Panthers at 8. There's a lot of potential landing spots for Howard. And then Njoku's going to be a first-round pick as well. And then keep an eye on Evan Ingram from Ole Miss as well. He's just a real dynamic weapon at that position, kind of a souped-up version, a healthier version of Jordan Reed of Washington. And he's an undersized, almost plays like a wide receiver in a tight end's body, but just a dynamic pass-catching threat with 4.4 speed. And he's going to be a legitimate top 50 pick as well. This is the past few years have been lackluster crops of tight ends. This year, it's outstanding, and that's another position where you're going to be able to get a good one in the third or fourth round. Jake Butt from Michigan, for example. Now, his stock has been affected by an injury he suffered in the bowl game, but at one point he was being talked about as a first rounder, which I thought was a little bit of a stretch, but he might be there on day 3 now.
Hey, Scott, who's someone who will be drafted too high?
Too high? That's a good question. I'll say it's probably going to be one of these quarterbacks. And whether it's Trubisky or Watson, I mentioned those are the two that are the favorites to be the first one off the board, and maybe as high as number 12 overall to the Cleveland Browns. But I don't have a first-round grade on either of them. I think they're more second, third-round types, and I understand quarterbacks get pushed up, and I don't like to criticize teams for at least trying. But if Mitchell Trubisky were to go in the top 10 to 12 overall, that would be a reach for me that was on par with Blake Bortles when he came out. I actually had a slightly higher grade on Bortles than I did on Trubisky.
Or, as you mentioned before, if someone took John Ross, number 5, that's too high, right?
It would be a reach, but John Ross is going somewhere in the top 15 to 20. And when it comes to guys with that type of rare speed, I'd always bet on the higher end of the spectrum.
Couple quick local guys here in terms of what about the kid from Temple, Reddick? He's probably first-round pick, right?
Yeah, a really interesting prospect, and everyone kind of knows his story by now, where he started out as a walk-on defensive back and kind of made his mark as a edge pass rusher. Now, during this draft process, he made that conversion to linebacker and showed the ability to do that either inside or outside, and really helped his draft stock. He's probably made as much money in the past few months as any prospect in this draft. And in my most recent mock, I had him going number 30 to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he might not even last that long. I've even heard some chatter that the top 10 overall one it could be in the cards, and I find that a little hard to believe, but I've seen crazier things on draft day. I think the top 20 is a legitimate possibility, but one way or another, Reddick's going to be a first-rounder.
Now, here's one of the things I love about Scott. Now, sometimes you could throw a random obscure guy your way, and you seemingly know everything about him, but kid from our area, Oakcrest, went to Penn State, Brandon Bell, outside linebacker. Not sure if he's even a draftable guy, but do you know much about him at all?
Yes, absolutely. He's been in the rankings on my site from day one, and like you said, he's going to be more of a priority free agent. But I think he's got a chance to get into camp. He's a little undersized. He doesn't have either the length or the bulk that you necessarily prefer, but he got better every year. That was the thing. He's a production increased every year, and he's probably going to profile as more of a backup special teams. That's going to be his route to make an NFL roster if he is. But he won't be drafted, but I think he's got a chance to be in a camp.
That's why Scott's the best. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Check out his latest mock draft and, of course, all the rankings at every position. 20 days till the NFL draft is here live in Philadelphia, and you can hear every pick on 97.3 ESPN. Scott, I'm sure we will catch up again between now and the 27th, pal.
All right. Thanks for having me.